Welcome back to One Stop Law. Now, amidst this Russian-Ukraine conflict, let us look into the role of United Nations Organization, which is the primary international body responsible for maintaining international peace and security. And the we all know what has happened. Like once the United Security Council tried to bring a resolution to only condemn Russia's act of aggression, Russia vetoed it, and that's why United Nations has been criticized time and again for being powerless. And it's true that Ivano's fiercest critic will admit that although it has done a lot of good for the world around us, but at the same time it is being accused of being tangled in bureaucracy and for being decently reactive rather than proactive in addressing world crisis, because we can all see that a war is already going on for almost 2 weeks. Moreover, United Nations has also been accused of having failed in acting in preventing genocide in places like Rwanda in 1994, Bosnia in 1995, and Sudan in early 2000. Some critics even call the organization totally powerless, and we know that's not totally wrong, because there are certain only handful of countries in the United Nations which exercise actual control and power over it. Yes, we are talking about the Security Council and its 5 permanent members, whom we call the P5 or the Big Five, and their right to veto. So in this video specifically, I will try to delve into the origin of Security Council, what is the right of veto, how the Big Five has got this power, and how its implementation has failed to prevent humanitarian crisis around the world time and again. Now, to understand the context in which the Security Council was set up, we need to look into the history of the world and when United Nations was created. We know Security Council is one of the 6 principal organs of the United Nations organization. United Nations organization itself was founded on 24th of October 1945. It was created immediately after the end of the Second World War, and its main goal, as per the United Nations Charter, was its preamble states that its main goal was to save the succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Now, USA, UK, and the then Soviet Union were the 3 major allied powers who came victorious of World War II. Thus, the former and the then US President Franklin D. Roosevelt lobbied for Chinese inclusion as a permanent member of the Security Council, while the then Britain Prime Minister Winston Churchill did the same to include a European country, that is France, as one of its permanent members. And the problem is, till date, this composition of Security Council, the permanent membership of Security Council, has remained unchanged since its first meeting. So thus the P5, the Big Five, were constituted of the Security Council, and they were granted the veto power, which meant that their single negative vote carries the power to reject a resolution. Now, basically, as you can see, to the composition, it had Russia and China on one side, and USA, UK, and France on the other. So basically, it's like the West versus the rest, in which way this United Nations has been operating till date. Now, to look into more specifically into the functions and powers of Security Council, basically Chapter 5 of the UN Charter provides for the composition, function, powers and limitations of Security Council, Articles 23 to 32. I just talked about the veto power. It is basically a product of Article 27, which talks about the voting in Security Council. But the major functions, if you look into of the Security Council, is firstly to maintain international peace and global order by enforcing law and action. So maintenance of international peace and security is the primary function of Security Council. The next, they have been given the power to investigate threats to international peace, then to recommend a resolution process if there is any threat. And in this process, it has also been given the power to impose and lift sanctions as and when required on a country which violates the terms of international peace. And the most important power, you can see I have made it in a green rectangle on the screen. It has been given the power even to use military intervention force as a last resort to restore peace. So we can generally, the question comes, then why is this war going on? So we will look into that. Veto is the ultimate answer to this. and obviously the bureaucracy and the world international politics. But has it not used its military sanctions in earlier, this Ivano? Of course it has. Like it Ivano has used its military sanctions against Gaddafi in Libya in 2011. It had also imposed a lot of sanctions on Iran in response to their nuclear program in 2006. So time and again, Security Council has used most of its measures. And I was just telling you that the Constitution of Security Council, as respect to its permanent members, the five permanent seats has remained unchanged, which has the power to use veto. But these same countries, this P5 later on has created six, but which was again increased to 10 non-permanent membership seats to Security Council. Okay, and these non-permanent members rotate every 2 years. And for any resolution to pass in United Nations Security Council, Article 27 of the United Nations Charter provides that for any resolution to pass in United Nations Security Council, 9 out of 15 members should vote in favor of it. So we see that even though these non-permanent members do not have veto power, yet they do play a very important role in United Nations Security Council's role in maintaining world peace. But the major drawback of the role of United Nations, specifically Security Council's role in maintaining international peace and security, is the veto power of the permanent members. Because even if one of the P5 states vote against the resolution using its right to veto, then the resolution fails there only. Right of veto is such that even if 14 votes are casted in favor of a resolution and a single negative vote is casted against it by any of the big five members, it blocks or destroys the resolution. We have instance of that. I will tell you about that. And this is the case which is the major blockage in proper functioning. So as you can see on the screen, this right to veto has been exercised time and again by the permanent members of the Security Council. And the saddest part is that often in cases, it has been found that the P5 have actually used this power to advance their own political interests in the face of global crisis, which is very wrong. And this has not happened once or twice. The five permanent members have used this right to veto almost nearly 300 times till date from 1945, since the time it is constituted. And you can see the maximum times it has been exercised by Russia. USA is also not far behind, and it has been used time and again by all the countries. So if I in the next few slides, I will take you through some of the cases in which these countries have issued their right to veto, and which is very sad to say, because somewhere or the other they have given their interest kept their interest above humanitarian crisis, or say the welfare of the mankind was placed at a back foot because of their selfish interest. Now, we just saw in the previous chart that Russia is the country to have used the veto power for the maximum times of all the permanent members, and it only in case of Syria it has used veto for the 13 times. China also vetoed the same resolutions. 13 times the draft resolutions concerning Syria were vetoed, and Syrian civil war, we know how badly it has affected the world. So these draft resolutions included condemning Syria, and included actions for calling ceasefire in Syria that would have allowed chemical weapons investigation in Syria, and refer Syria to International Criminal Court. So these vetoes actually stopped the world leaders from taking any strong and concrete action to help to stop the civil war in Syria, which was very sad. Almost 400,000 people have died because of this Syrian conflict since 2011. Same way, Russia has also used its veto power to protect its own national interest in cases of Crimean island, annexation. I just told you about it in my last video. Also, it is doing the same thing. You see, in case of Ukraine, it has called it a special military operation, and it's now what situation it has taken. We all know the war is going on. Civilians are being killed, and if Russia is not stopped, we because Ukraine has given a strong resistance, but if uh, Russia has to annex, then more civilian wars lives have to be compromised, and this is not a good sign. We all know Russia again vetoed the United Nations Security Resolution a week back on condemning Russia's action of aggression against Ukraine. So the same thing is going on till date. Now, Russia is not alone in using its veto power in accordance with its national interests. USA also has time and again vetoed down almost many resolutions. We just saw in that chart USA was right behind Russia in that chart of using the veto power. So USA has actually voted down all the resolutions against Israel, including those which would have actually called Israel to completely withdraw its forces from Palestinian territories, and also for to stop a mass killing of Palestinians in the Gazi border. I was just telling you that ratio of 14 is to 1, which is so unfair. This has happened only in case of USA's vote. USA casted a single opposite vote against 14 affirmative votes of the United Nations Security Council resolution, which called on USA to withdraw its embassy from Jerusalem, but it casted its negative vote and blocked that resolution. So USA did this only to support its ally Israel. Israel is USA's ally, and therefore USA has voted down all the resolutions, in matters relating to recognition of Palestinian state, illegal settlements there, and also for the right to return of the Palestinians. So, and it had been condemned. Many states criticized USA in the United Nations, but all went in vain because it was a clear case where a country was actually in favor of an occupying power at the expense of the rights and lives of the occupied people, which is very sad. And it's not only about USA and Russia. Even China has used its veto power many a times. Like China has vetoed several measures against Taiwan independence because China refuses to recognize Taiwan. And the saddest part of this veto is that even a threat of veto is enough, to keep the resolutions off from the table, as it happened, when there were mass killing of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. China was always a major trade partner of Myanmar and was always expected to, veto any resolutions related to that issue. So no resolution was actually brought in UN Security Council. So this is the saddest part of veto. The fear of it only, because anyway the resolutions are going to fail. Resolutions are not brought. So, what can be the solution to this situation? The first solution, the first two solutions, has actually come from the some of the permanent members of the Security Council itself. Like the first solution, which is proposed by many of the experts, is expansion of the permanent membership in the Security Council. That is to include more countries and make them permanent members. They should also be having the right to veto, but the membership should be extended to other countries because there is not sufficient representation of many countries, like from Asia, Latin America, and African countries. So basically 4 countries are in the run as of the talks right now. G4 nations, as we know, India, Brazil, Germany, and Japan, are in the run for the permanent membership of United Nations. But like to this, France and UK are the 2 countries which are open to such expansion of permanent membership, but USA, Russia, and China are more conscious about their own interest, and they have kind of directly opposed this expansion. Okay. And the second solution has come from again from the 2 other permanent members, that is specifically France and UK, and what they have proposed is that of something known as the concept of voluntary restraint. That is, the P5, the big five, will have a responsibility on their own of not using this veto power in situations where mass atrocities are being committed. For example, what happened in Syria. Sorry. So actually, see, we all know that, with power come responsibilities, and with great power comes greater responsibilities. So if you are big five, you are the most powerful nations of the world, you have to use your power more sensibly and reasonably. So where you see that humanitarian crisis is more important, you have to give importance to that, and keeping back or setting back your own national interests or political issues. So this proposal, this concept of self restraint, that is keeping the veto power, as also allowing it, leaving it to the greater good conscience of the big five, of on by process of self restraint, or voluntary restraint, has gained a lot of support from major humanitarian groups around the world, because this is something which is, which is very ideal. However, there are some critics to this concept as well, because they think that veto is necessary. They do not, vouch for absolute removal of veto. At the same time, regarding this point of voluntary restraint on veto, these critics consider veto to be, operating as a check and balance on foreign intervention, and therefore they see that they consider that it will be again difficult to, have a very concrete and streamlined definition of what a mass atrocity is, and in which case, the countries will have to restrain from using their veto. So there is a debate on that. The final suggestion is, of course, the complete removal of this veto power, because we have to understand that basically veto, what veto says, that veto says this five core members, this P5, big five, can never go wrong, which is, i I mean, completely illogical and a very flawed design to begin with. uh, we must keep in mind that veto was supposed, why was veto brought? It was brought as a reward for the countries who had, who carried out the burden of fighting the World War II, who were the allied powers. I just discussed it in the background. But if these nations today do not have the power of didn't have this single negative power of vote, don't you think these situations, like, like what happened in Syria, Palestine, and what is ongoing in Ukraine, would have been, very different, would have been very different, and very easily handled by the United Nations Security Council as well, if this veto power was not there. So, in conclusion, to say that whether it is time for United Nations Security Council to give up the veto, the answer to this is obviously yes. See, despite all the flaws we just discussed in this video, we have to admit that UN plays a very pivotal role in creating, vital space for diplomacy, mediation, and in maintaining international peace. It has done a lot to save, lives, help people to lift them from poverty, and in maintaining global order till date. But is it sufficient? Like the arguments, the criticism of it faces as a powerless organization is also rising, specifically what we are seeing today happening in Ukraine. Yes, we can see that, UNSC resolution to condemn Russia's act of aggression against Ukraine failed because of Russians' veto. But yes, every day we can see United Nations and General Assembly is quite, trying hard to, to put pressure on Russia, condemning its actions, and, putting pressure on Russia every day, asking it, to withdraw its forces from Ukraine. But is it sufficient? No, it is not sufficient. So it is. No, undoubtedly, veto is kind of an arbitrary power given to these big powers, which has no rational basis, because sometimes it compromises with global humanitarian crisis, and it fails to address the needs of the people, of the mankind, which is wrong. So yes, veto has to be removed. Also, permanent member seats in the United Nations Security Council needs to be expanded, because United Nations cannot stay, in a position in which it was created 50-60 years back. United Nation has not changed with time, it has not evolved with time, because of which, it has become today powerless and completely irrelevant. We can see crisis after crisis evolving in the world, across the world, and United Nations has nothing to do but depend completely on the big powers. When America decides NATO to send NATO, or when Russia invades a country like Ukraine and it cannot pass a resolution just because of the veto power. So it needs to come out of this situation by it's therefore it's very important to see now how United Nations actually addresses this situation, and kind of amends and reforms its charter for betterment, and for betterment of human race and mankind, and in its actual duty of restoring world peace and maintaining international peace and security. So that's all for this video. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you all.